Hello, welcome back to the channel. Let's talk about why the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are both very racist and always have been. So hang on to your butts for this one, and if you like the content, don't forget to like, subscribe, drop a comment with your thoughts below and help this channel grow. And if you want more lighthearted stuff, check out my main channel, links are in the description. So if we go back to the start of the Republican Party, it was started really during the Civil War era. At least that's when we got our first Republican president in Abraham Lincoln. And the Republicans' goal was to make the government larger, more federally regulated, and more favorable to the ideas of big business globally. The US needed to be one country rather than a bunch of little countries operating as quote-unquote states who happen to work together to common ends. Abraham Lincoln was able to achieve this massive increase of federal government power by focusing on a greater good, which was the abolition of slavery. And that was the platform used to eventually launch the Civil War and give the federal government far more control over the individual state rights. Honestly, this whole fiasco could have been avoided if the Democratic Party was, willing to give up slaves. If they would have, just been like, you know what, you're right, we'll on our own merit stop having slaves because it's atrocious, and even in that day they knew that was a human rights violation. The argument of the Democrats at the time, and still today, and we'll get into that a little bit, was that the slaves were more or less subhuman and or incapable of life on their own. They reasoned that the most empathetic thing to do was to keep them enslaved because they couldn't make it on their own. The free blacks in the North were often impoverished or undereducated and not doing great, but the slaves in the South were doing just fine, the Democrats would argue, because they're under our protection, our control, and our care. And, there was never really a agreement made, so there was a war, and the Confederacy lost what would become really the Democratic Party, and the South remained predominantly Democratic until around the Nixon administration. And this is a time when a lot of people say that there was some sort of big shift in the party's mindsets, but that's the rumor, is what I'll call it, that I'd like to dispel here. The parties really haven't ever changed. All that's changed is the way that the parties word their agenda. The Republican Party's main mission is still to be a world mega power. They want the United States of America to be the country that kicks everyone's ass. They want to have the most money and the biggest boom boom armory. That's what they've wanted since the Lincoln administration. It's still what they want. Republicans who claim they want small government are lying to themselves and or have been lied to. They don't want that. Also, the notion that Republicans as a party aren't racist, that's not right either. It's a different type of racism. The type of racism that comes from the Democratic Party from their inception to now is this idea that black people and other minorities are inferior and incapable. The racism that comes from the Republican Party, it's more of a fuck minorities. They can take care of themselves if they want to. We're not going to give them any sort of special treatment, even if they've had special disadvantages. And, we think that numero uno is whichever dude is the most powerful. And I mean dude because the Republicans are also a lot more historically anti-women. I say anti-women to kind of match terminology of our day. By anti-women, I mean that Republicans believe in more traditional evolutionary views on women, where women should fall into their biological dispositions, as should men, rather than just doing whatever the hell they want. And that usually is seen as anti-women by a lot of other folks. Anyway, moving on. So Republicans are a lot less, I would say, targeted in their racism, but their actions seem more egregious. They're going to be the ones that will push against any sort of laws that would force equality. They say if someone wants to be racist, let them be racist. There shouldn't be laws to force someone to not be racist, that sort of thing. Republicans often have a mind your own fucking business mindset, even if that's at the expense of human rights. Unless what you're doing gets in the way of their bottom line of being the American superpower. Democrats, on the other hand, their version of racism is one that has always been, from the days of slavery, one that is justified through supposed empathy and rescuer syndrome and or projected victimhood. The Democrats have always seen minorities, especially black people, as just incapable. This is why you had like the movie from Disney songs of the South. Now, interestingly enough, Disney brought this mindset from his upbringing as a Democrat, but he eventually disavowed the Democratic Party and went to the Republicans when the Democrats didn't like how forward he was with his agendas, and he went to the Conservative Party that didn't mind his overt racism. This mindset lives on today. You see Democrats push for laws that make voter ID not required because they argue that minorities don't even have IDs or driver's licenses because they're clearly incapable of doing such basic things because they're minorities who are just terribly disadvantaged and incapable. What the Democratic Party has and continues to do is put laws in place that systematically or systemically make sure that black people are kept in little boxes and other minorities are kept in little boxes where they could control them and keep them dependent on them, just like they did when they enslaved them. The Republicans would just as soon let all of the minorities in the world just die of starvation because they never gave them an equal chance, because they would prefer to hire people that looked and acted like them, and minorities are scary and weird, so fuck them, leave them alone, right? So both of these parties are very racist in very different ways. They always have been, and it has not changed. There was no fundamental shift. None of that has happened. This has always been how it is. This is why people like Ben Shapiro are not really accurate when they talk about there's no systemic racism. There's no systemic racism in that you're not going to be able to find too many laws that are strictly written that say black people can't do this. But there's plenty of laws that are loopholes designed to oppress minorities that exist. And there's still social stigmas, and there's still overt racism within individuals as well as within policy and politics. A great example of some semi-modern racism from the 90s came from Joe Biden's crime bill with Bill Clinton, in which he described the people he was targeting with this crime bill, which is basically poor, minorities, and yeah, some white folks as well, and I'll let his words speak for themselves.
We must take back the streets. It doesn't matter whether or not the person that is accosting your son or daughter or my son or daughter, it doesn't matter whether or not they were deprived as a youth. It doesn't matter or not whether or not they had no background that enabled them to become socialized into the fabric of society. So I don't want to ask what made them do this. The Republican leader of this effort, Senator Hatch, the Republican senator from Texas, we all agree on that. They are beyond the pale, many of those people. And it's a sad commentary on society. You know what the basic premise of the Sentencing Commission is? I know the presiding officer knows. It was the first time in 80 years we rejected the notion that the condition of sentencing must be related to how long it would take to rehabilitate. So you cannot make rehabilitation a condition for release. We must make the streets safer. I don't care why someone is a malfactor in society. We have an obligation to cordon them off from the rest of society, try to help them, try to change their behavior. That's why we do in this bill. We have drug treatment and we have other treatments to try to deal with it. But they are in jail. Old barbed wire Republican conservatives just want to hang them high. Even those folks are saying, hey, we got to deal with the root cause of this. Not one or the other, but separately. They're now saying, hey, look, we got to take back the streets. We'll make that fight later. We do everything but hang people for jaywalking in this bill.
And, you know, this was Joe Biden, Democrat then, and Joe Biden, Democrat now is no different. So what's the point of the video? The point of this video is to just understand, I see both political parties coming at each other for you're ignorant and racist, you do blah, blah, blah. Look, guys, you're both right. The Republicans and the Democrats, from their foundation to now, are inherently racist political parties. They have their own agendas, which always put minorities under their thumb or under their foot. And for anyone who wants to cry representation here on behalf of the Democratic Party, well, the Democratic Party is always trying to put these people in, positions of power, and that shows their actions that they're not racist or they're not whatever. Look, a lot of the times the positions of power they're put in are figurehead positions, like Biden putting a trans woman into a medical advisory board where they're essentially a secretary. But beyond all that, if you give someone something that they didn't earn and you give it to them on a basis of some other merit, which is a very favorite thing of the Democrats to do, you get to, behind closed doors, or in open spaces hold that over their head and still control them. So that's part of the whole control scheme that I'm talking about. So including minorities in positions of quote-unquote power, yeah, it's still all a part of the same game. So nice try. I would say in overall impact in recent years, the Democratic Party has had more impact negatively towards minority communities. So right now, the Democratic Party is definitely in the lead of actual legislation made to look like it helps minorities that actually hurts minorities. But, you know, the Republicans are winning in the overt racism, racial statements, racial slurs, racially heated actions, either in public or behind closed doors, because honestly, most Republicans don't like change and don't like things that are different than themselves, so overt daily racism is going to be a lot stronger, generally speaking, from people from that party. So all of this to tell you that, once again, Democrats and Republicans really just suck at pretty much everything, and you should really not align with either of those parties for a party's sake. Maybe there's a certain candidate from one of those parties that you like, that's fine, but you really shouldn't identify with either of these political parties. They're both extremely bad. Anyway, that's all for today. Until next time, I scheme, you scheme, we all scheme for ice cream. Drop your comments and your thoughts below, and likes and subscriptions or your hate. I don't really care. Bye!